Okay, well, thank you all for signing into the prescription opioids, an introduction and overview of pharmacology and effects, presented by Michael Palladini. He has over 20 years of work experience in hospital, retail, and long-term care pharmacy. He currently works as the Director of Client Services for a long-term care pharmacy provider and is an outpatient drug and alcohol specialist. He helped to develop and instruct in pharmacy technical programs. Mike has received his BS in pharmacy from the Medical College of Virginia, an MBA from Robert Morris University, and he is the founder of Three Sons Publishing, recently published Drugs of Abuse from Doctors to Dealers, Users, and Healers. And we have his website listed there too, so you can check him out there. Okay, now I'm going to, Mike, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I'm going to transfer the screen over to you now. So just click on that box in the center of your screen, and we will be able to view your PowerPoint. Do you see that box?
I believe I got it.
Okay. There we go. And now, if you want to go to the upper left-hand corner of your panel and just click that orange arrow, that will minimize it for you, so you won't have to deal with that.
How are we? Good?
Yes. And I think everybody's
all right.
here. So, as I said before, people, please feel free to ask questions at any time during this webinar. Just type them in to the questions box, and we will hold them for the Q&A section.
I'm afraid I lost the PowerPoint. Bear with me a second.
Mike, just go up and minimize this. If you go to the upper right, up higher. Up higher.
Sorry.
There we go.
I apologize.
Oh, no, that's okay.
I'm sorry about all this.
On the slide down the lower left, you might be able to pull it up.
That is not the one I want, though. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
I can get it back out here. Bear with me. It got rid of it, and then.
Yeah, no problem.
Nothing like starting off on the right.
Yeah, no, that's okay. While you're doing that, I'll just make the announcement that at the end of this webinar, for those who would like to go to the online course, we will give you instructions on the next steps. Also, after the webinar, I'll be sending everybody an email with the PowerPoint to this session, as well as a link to an evaluation we would like you all to complete. And I will also send a certificate of attendance and a CEU order form. Even though they're free, we would like you to register for them. And we will also send you the instructions to go onto our website and get into the online training. So that will be in addition to the instructions you'll get at the end. All right, perfect timing. Thank you.
Okay, it should be in front of everybody now. Thank you. Thank you.
Right.
Sorry it took a while. Are we good to go?
Yes, you're on.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody, and thanks to PCB and IRETA for sponsoring this. And as I heard it announced there, a record-breaking attendance for this, my initial attempt at delivering one of these webinars. So thank you. I've done this presentation live and in person many times, but this is the first time I've attempted to do this remotely. So it's an experience for me, and I'm hoping that it goes well. So again, thank you all for participating, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. I've certainly enjoyed getting it together for the organization. I was doing a little bit of research on how to make one of these webinars present as smoothly and best as possible, and one of the points was to not hold it in the middle of the afternoon. That is the time of day that most people are ready to nod off and call it quits on listening. So we have a challenge there to make this interesting and hopefully something that will keep you awake and engaged while we do this. So again, as my introduction has already been made, we'll move on to what we'd like to accomplish here today. And in front of you are the learning objectives. And the purpose of most of my presentations and trainings are to deliver the pharmaceutical knowledge that underscores the medications used and abused in addiction treatment and education. So the objectives in front of you there are pretty straightforward, and what we want to do is identify what are the various opiates and opioid medications used, and describe them pharmacologically and chemically also. Now, the word opioid is going to be interchanged with opiate throughout this whole talk, so there's no need to be confused there. Opiate is what we will see being the chemical that comes out of the natural plant source, much like marijuana. THC comes out of the marijuana plant. Cocaine comes out of the coca plant. Opiates come out of the opium plant. And then opioids is the term used to describe the various chemicals that are made to be like opiates. And we'll spend a good amount of time looking at those specific opioids. And more importantly, the neurochemical effects of what these opioids do in the human brain and how that results in specific symptoms. And then finally, we want to understand how opioids are used in the treatment of opiate dependency, specifically methadone and buprenorphine more recently, as drugs within the same class working neurochemically and pharmacologically to help somebody with their struggles in their opiate dependency. So our learning objectives can be broken down into those three areas: identifying what these drugs are, what their differences are, how they work differently in our brains neurochemically, and then how do we use these same drugs within this classification to treat the opiate dependency itself. So, of course, we've got to start out with a few statistics that really can bring this home as to why is this a problem? Why has it become such a large issue recently, and what types of statistics are we looking at? I'm in the Pittsburgh area, and tomorrow at a local college there's going to be a symposium hosted by the DEA and the Attorney General's Office on prescription drug abuse. And unfortunately, the timing was that would happen after our presentation today, or I'd like to have brought you some up-to-date information as to what the DEA and what local drug enforcement authorities were seeing in this problem, but that'll have to wait. Regardless, it has been an issue. It's a legal issue. Of course, these folks are interested in it, and is a treatment issue, as this slide here from 2009 data will show you that treatment admissions for opiates other than heroin, which would be our painkillers as they're called, rose 450% in a 10-year period. And reporting systems show how many Americans are currently using prescription drugs non-medically. 7 million reported in 2009. And more strikingly, that last fact there, 2.2 million Americans are using pain relievers recreationally or non-medically for the first time, a very similar number to initiates of marijuana use at 2.4 million. So these are SAMHSA gathered data that shows basically a demographic of young adults, adolescents using opiate pain relievers as their first attempt into using a substance recreation. A Dawn report from 2009 spells out our emergency department visits and what kind of drugs we are seeing in toxic overdoses within our emergency rooms throughout our country. Most frequently reported drugs are opioid analgesics, present in 50% of these emergency room visits. And there we see our drugs that are mainly seen: hydrocodone, oxycodone, and methadone, predominantly oxycodone. And this was for the year 2009. So we'll look at hydrocodone, oxycodone, methadone, and some of the other opioid drugs that are present in a lot of overdose and toxic reactions, either alone or in combination with other drugs. This slide here represents a financial and insurance interest in this problem, which I am seeing to be more recent and something that may lead to some better answers and some action in addressing this. Workplace insurers spend $1.4 billion annually paying for narcotic painkillers or opioids, meaning if you're in treatment and you see people who are long-time workers' compensation patients whose claims continue year after year after year, and they are on long-acting, strong narcotic or opioid painkillers as their treatment and no other type of treatment, insurance companies are spending an overwhelming amount of money on this, and that leads them to look into how can they save some money. I've read some reports that are in some states, Washington State as well as New York State, that has mandated that if a client is placed into a program that utilizes long-acting opiate medications, then they must be referred to a certified pain physician to oversee their therapy. No longer can a GP or a physician from an employer continue to prescribe long-acting medications because of the cost involved as well as the lack of an end to therapy. In regard to pure sales, painkillers reached $8.5 billion worth of sales last year, which was 2009. Sorry, that's not on there. Compared with $4.4 billion in 2001. So that has basically doubled in an 8-year period. In between 2001 and 2008, narcotic prescriptions as a share of all drugs used to treat workplace injuries jumped 63%. So this slide is telling us that that is the mode of treatment that physicians have gone to treat these long-term cases of chronic pain, injury, workers' compensation cases that eventually put a lot of these products out on the street for others to use. An interesting sidebar to that is that you've got a person who, or an individual who is unable to work and receiving probably a limited income, now has product in their hand that has a high street value. So that can be a conduit for a lot of these drugs reaching the street and lending to an additional income for patients. Forbes magazine put this stat out there year after year, and in 2009 and 2010, both years in a row, the #1 prescribed drug in our country is the hydrocodone acetaminophen combination. And there you see the numbers of how many prescriptions in each year were filled out of a total of 4 billion prescriptions on average that we fill in those years. The average monthly cost is only $12, so it's not an expensive medication. It's available in an immediate release formulation, and it has acetaminophen, APAP, or Tylenol in it, which lends to a questionable or dangerous use. That being said, there are some products in the pipeline which may be available this coming year that are hydrocodone only, time-release formulation. One of them is called Zohydro, that's Z-O-H-Y-D-R-O, from the Zogenix Corporation in California, which is something that will really be a product that will require some specific monitoring. And we'll talk a little bit more about immediate release, extended release formulations as we move through. I'm not going to do obviously. This is off the DEA website, a fact sheet stating all of the concerns and statistics that they have regarding opioid or prescription drugs. Just if you read through that, you can see the perception from, a lot of it is from young people, from teens who are using these drugs. They believe them to be safer than illegal drugs. They're easy to find. They lend to a lot of emergency room visits like we mentioned earlier. 60% of teens who have used prescription pain relievers did so before the age of 15. That's a startling statistic, basically because of the fact of the brain chemistry that we're going to look at, and its development at that age of 15 is truly not developed, and here we are introducing some extremely potent chemicals to the neurochemical network of human at that age, where development is extremely compromised. The last stat there, the number of persons seeking treatment for pain reliever abuse increased over 400% in that 10-year period between 1998 and 2008. So again, those of us who are in the treatment field are seeing more and more people whose drug of choice are the opiates. So much for our statistics. We're going to look now at how do we view opiates or opioids and our neurochemistry in our brain. I like to look at it as a sort of a chemical puzzle where we've got a variety of neurotransmitters, and some are listed here, and there are others that are going to be of concern. We've got dopamine and GABA and serotonin and natural endorphins, and they are all doing what they need to do to maintain our homeostasis, our daily life. And then we add opioids to this chemical puzzle, this chemical mix, and then things start to join up or work a little differently. So just keep in mind that the way to view everything we're going to look at in the complexity of our central nervous system and our brain can be looked at as a sort of a chemical puzzle which is constantly trying to rearrange itself and work properly. So where do we start? It all starts right here in an opium field. This is a picture of some opium poppy plants growing in a field which most likely could be in Afghanistan. We'll look at some statistics on where this stuff comes from. But these are the opium poppies growing naturally in a field, harvested possibly 4 times a year. Now we can get from the opium poppy, which I'll use my, there we go, right there. We can get from that natural poppy plant to other substances, such as heroin or morphine or OxyContin, all in processed form. The stuff that comes out of here that we'll look at as opium needs to be processed by humans to get all of these other products that we're familiar with. And we're going to look at why is this different from this and this here. The opium poppy itself contains what are called numerous alkaloids, or naturally forming chemicals, notably morphine, codeine, and something called thebaine. Morphine is the predominant chemical alkaloid in the opium plant in concentrations up to 15%. Codeine much smaller, to about 3%, and thebaine much smaller also. Now thebaine we don't recognize as being a drug, Nobody has taken a thebaine tablet or used thebaine, but it can be used to create other chemicals that you will recognize. Look at that. There's a picture of raw opium that is scraped off of this plant, comes out in this raw form and dried out. It can be smoked, eaten, dissolved in alcohol for various means to internalize it, or it can be processed into pure morphine or codeine or heroin or other chemicals for pharmaceutical use that we'll take a look at here. I'm sorry, this slide came out a little fuzzy, but it just shows you global opium production as of 2009 and where this stuff is coming from. It is predominantly coming out of Afghanistan since the year 2001. Other areas of the world noted there. Mexico would probably make up most of that gray bar. They are starting to get into the opium market. The price went up significantly in 2009 due to a few factors, notably the demand in the world as well as the problems that were encountered in Afghanistan with the type of drought, and the plant just had a hard time in that year from what I've read and seen in some reports. But just please take away from this that Afghanistan is the major supplier of opium poppy plant grown in this world. So how do we look at these opiates? I like to look at them, and this is a good way for anybody who's going to study these to understand all the different products that can be gotten from the opium plant and all the different and specific chemicals and hence pharmaceutical drugs that become available. We've got a natural source of the opium plant which gives us morphine and codeine. Straight out of the plant through some very simple processes we can isolate these two chemicals and have them available for use. The 6 drugs listed under the semi-synthetic banner are drugs that are made chemically from the morphine and codeine. You've got diacetylmorphine, which is heroin, hydromorphone, and the rest listed there. These are chemicals, and I'll show you the process that is involved here. These particular drugs are derived specifically from the natural source drugs. And then there are synthetic, fully synthetic chemicals that are made completely by man, and those are meperidine or Demerol, fentanyl, and methadone. These drugs, or these chemicals / drugs, were devised for specific reasons of potency and trying to eliminate side effects, fully synthesized by human man to meet our needs. So let's see what we've got here. The natural opiates, morphine and codeine, developed in the early 19th century. Morphine called that because of the Greek god name of Morpheus. The drug made people feel godlike, so they gave it that name. Codeine is the Greek word for poppy head. Again, be recognized that this chemical came from the poppy. And again, there are the percentages that they occur naturally in the plant. And when they were discovered, we're talking a ways back in the early 19th century. Morphine being used for moderate or severe pain currently, codeine for mild to moderate pain, and also for cough suppression. And there are some of the names of the products that have been developed over the years utilizing these chemicals. Again, these were derived from the plant, utilized over the past nearly 200 years now. The semi-synthetic opiates go through a certain chemical process to give us these different chemicals: diacetylmorphine or heroin, hydromorphone or Dilaudid, oxycodone that everyone is familiar with. The brand name's OxyContin, roxicodone, oxymorphone or Apana, hydrocodone had some brand names, Vicodin and Lortab, and buprenorphine, utilized in the brands of Suboxone and Subutex. And we'll look at the processes that create these. The synthetic opiates of meperidine, fentanyl, and methadone, and also tramadol. Now, the chemical structures of these are not related to morphine or codeine at all. They are fully synthetic. And tramadol falls into that category. It is called by the FDA and authorities as a non-typical opioid. So it is somewhat related to the opiate structure, but has some synthetic qualities to it that lend it to be a synthetic opiate. Now we'll look at some opioid chemistry here to help you understand as to why these different drugs exist, why we have them all for prescribing, dispensing, administering purposes, and ultimately why different opiates are abused for their specific properties. If we've got different chemicals, and I've got some chemistry to show you here in a little bit, which hopefully won't scare anybody away, but hopefully it'll illustrate what we're talking about. When we change the chemical structure of the morphine or the codeine, we give the drug or the chemical a different degree of absorption within our bodies and within our central nervous system. We give it a different rate of absorption. We're going to look at these absorption principles when we discuss a little bit of pharmacokinetics. How quickly does a drug go through our GI tract or into our brain through our blood-brain barrier? How long does it stick around? How long does it take to have an effect? All this can be determined by listing its onset and duration of action. Its receptor affinity. We'll look at some receptor sites and why are these different chemicals activate different receptor sites to different degrees. And again, this will lead to different side effects, varying degrees of side effects. Every individual reacts differently, we'll see. So there's going to be a wide spectrum of how these drugs are received by an individual and processed and experienced. So here's our chemistry. Let me point something out to you here. This is provided by nature in the opium plant. And morphine, the morphine molecule being the first discovered, is the prototype. That is where opiate chemistry began. And this is how everything is based. If you follow my cursor here, you'll see we've got these little kind of ring-like structures that join together. There's 4 of them on this paper. And then these bold lines that kind of are drawn like this represent a 3D space coming towards the viewer, and these dotted lines represent a 3D space going away from you. So this is how chemistry can be illustrated in a 3D model, which is extremely important because our body chemistry is in 3 dimensions, and the dimensions make a difference as to how these drugs and chemicals will react in our central nervous system. One point here, you see codeine is very similar, but again, you've got some differences here with the carbon as well. Whoops, pardon me. I apologize. When you attach a carbon to this nitrogen here, this little loop tends to lag downward. I'm going to be careful with that. So that creates a difference in the 3-dimensional space, which then will create a difference in its receptor activity. If anybody's worked with morphine or codeine and know that those 2 drugs, codeine is not nearly as potent as an analgesic as morphine, so that basic chemistry is going to make a difference into how this drug is going to be absorbed into our central nervous system, how it's going to react with neurons in our brain that are responsible for transmitting pain, and how it's going to be eliminated from our body simply by this minute chemical difference. As I mentioned, we've got semi-synthetic opiates that are available as drugs in our national drug chest. Well, if you take the morphine molecule here and add a couple acetyl groups, diacetyl it's called, you get heroin. And there's no need to be overly concerned with knowing the specific chemistry, but certainly those in attendance that want to know this, it's right here for you. Hydromorphone. These names come from the chemicals that are involved. Hydromorphone takes the morphine molecule and adds a hydrogen here, takes one away here, so they named it hydromorphone. Oxymorphone, we've got an oxygen added here and oxygen here. Cute little names that these companies come up with that are a direct reflection of the chemistry that has been applied. And again, changes the activity and the potential for these drugs to reach the receptor sites in our brain. Taking the codeine molecule supplied to us by the opium plant, we can make oxycodone, hydrocodone. And a chemical point here is when you see this OH group here, which is called a hydroxyl group, and you remove a hydrogen and just make it an oxygen, this kind of double bond forms. This type of chemical is more chemically active in our human brain. So we're going to get more of it into our system to supply more effect. That's a basic chemical principle with opioids that is understood by laboratory chemists, and they apply chemistry to make that happen, get this hydrogen off of here and create a more lipophilic or fat-soluble chemical that can perfuse into the brain at a much more efficient rate. Another semi-synthetic opiate, as I mentioned earlier, uses the thebaine chemical that comes out of the plant, and we get buprenorphine, which is extremely important to our talk and discussion here today, and we'll hone in on that later. I know it looks a little crazy with all this stuff going on here, but it is a semi-synthetic drug with the basic chemistry of the morphine molecule, thebaine in this case, with a lot of extra stuff added to it, which gives it unique properties that we will discuss later. That all being said, based on some of the chemistry, there are relative strengths assigned to these different chemicals as far as how much analgesia, in general, they will provide to an individual. Morphine, again, is the prototype, so it is always applied one as the standard. And then you've got all the other chemicals, drugs we discussed listed. Codeine being about half as potent as morphine because of what is called metabolism. We'll look at the metabolic processes, which simply says in this case with codeine and hydrocodone that the drugs are broken down or metabolized by our system before they are really able to do their effective work in the body. They are what are called prodrugs. The drug codeine itself provides a metabolite, which is the active component. So we lose some of the potency from the chemical as well as the basic chemistry of it and its reactive potential with the receptors. And so forth, oxycodone, hydromorphone, oxymorphone. Surprisingly to some people who have just started looking into this, buprenorphine, or the component in Suboxone, has an analgesic potency of 40 times that of morphine. It's an extremely potent semi-synthetic opioid. Methadone as well, fentanyl being the most potent at anywhere from 50 to 100 times the potency of morphine. Being a synthetic drug, it was formulated or developed with that in mind to find a powerful narcotic to use in lieu of natural morphine. Usually ask for questions at this point, but we'll wait a little bit longer here as I've got a couple other things I'd like to go through. As I mentioned earlier, the DEA and the U.S. Attorney General is holding a symposium on prescription drug abuse. The White House has held a symposium last year and developed some initiatives on how to address this problem. There are international concerns if people, anybody out there reads as to what's going on internationally now with Latin American and South American countries who are the suppliers of these raw materials to us, again, is Afghanistan as well. All this being said, there is a legal component to all of these drugs besides the chemical and medical aspects of them that must be addressed and must be kept in mind when we're discussing them. All drugs that go through the FDA process need to be reviewed by the DEA for their potential to cause physical dependence and their ability to cause abuse. So they are reviewed and placed into what the DEA has developed into their controlled substance scheduling or categories of drugs, C1, 2, 3, and 4. There's also a C5, which really is not utilized much anymore. The chemicals that we're talking about, and we'll look at each one in its how they are rated or scheduled. C1 with the arrow pointing up is the highest potential for abuse, with C4 being the lowest potential. So the drugs are put into those categories after they are approved if the DEA and FDA combine deem that necessary. C1, in addition to being the most highly potential to cause abuse, also has no established or accepted medical use in this country, and that would be drugs such as heroin, LSD, MDMA or ecstasy. The other hallucinogens, marijuana is listed by the federal government as a C1. So the opiates that we're going to be talking about are all going to be mainly in the C2 and C3 categories. When we have some questions, if anybody wants to clarify any of this, they can certainly type that in, and I'll be glad to. The reason I have this picture as part of this discussion goes back to the creation of the DEA and some of the talks I do, and I like to put it all into perspective with this slide. Some people I've given this talk to, younger folks in the room, didn't recognize either person in this picture, and it really didn't have the impact I was looking for. But most people will recognize this, and this was a photo opportunity in 1972 when the DEA was created and all this controlled substance categorization and scheduling came into effect. Prior to 72, this did not exist, and simply stated, President Nixon asked Elvis Presley to be an honorary DEA agent. At the time, he stood for no tolerance with marijuana, heroin, some of the hallucinogens that were being utilized at the time, cocaine. That was the focus. The point now is that, unfortunately, we know what happened to Elvis Presley, and the drugs that he fell victim to 40 years later are the drugs that we are now very concerned with. So drug use in this country has evolved. The DEA's job has gotten more complex, and we've crossed into medical fields and crossed medical boundaries now, where we've got to look at other reasons as to why certain chemicals are being used. Prescription painkillers, opiate source, were simply just a case of heroin in 1972, and they have really exploded into a completely different industry now. So let's look, please, at each of these products individually, and then you can maybe get a better feel for them as to all the different products that we are looking at and how they differ to some degree. We mentioned morphine being the prototype, the natural opiate from the opium plant, usually utilized to treat moderate to severe pain relief. It's active orally and by IV administration, also IM, which is intravenous and intramuscularly. It has an immediate or IR form and an extended release form. The IR form is active in about 30 minutes. Extended release takes about 90 minutes. It has what's called moderate bioavailability. Now, bioavailability is a term used that measures how much of a chemical gets absorbed, usually through our GI tract, taken orally. So this drug has lower, about 40% or moderate bioavailability. So if you took a 30 milligram morphine tablet, it's going to get broken down in your system, and about 40% of it is going to actually be absorbed and utilized by our body. Morphine, in its chemical form, causes a huge histamine release as a reaction from our body, which lends to the additional sedation and drowsiness, as well as itching. And it also stimulates what's called the chemoreceptor trigger zone, which is an area of the brain that's responsible for nausea and vomiting. And that is a problem, a side effect associated with pretty much all of the opioids. And the little C2 there I put in to show that this drug is a Schedule II drug, recognized by the DEA as having a high degree of abuse. Codeine, the other natural opiate, there it is in its most recognized form, like a Tylenol 3 tablet, Tylenol with codeine, used for much milder and moderate pain relief, and more specifically for cough suppression. The codeine molecule will attach and suppress the area of our brain that is responsible for the cough reflex. Hydrocodone will as well, we'll look at. But these drugs are used in stronger cough syrups to quiet that cough reflex down. Unlike morphine, codeine is only active orally. So, and there is no long-acting product of it. And again, it's active in about 30 minutes. A little better bioavailability, at 50%. And again, causing histamine release and nausea and vomiting. This drug has traditionally been manufactured in combination with acetaminophen by Johnson & Johnson. They set the standard with this drug with their Tylenol with codeine products. This one is stamped 3. There is a Tylenol with codeine 2, a Tylenol with codeine 4, and those numbers are representative of how much codeine is in each of the products, 15, 30, and 60 milligrams respectively. When this drug is manufactured and distributed in its combination form, it is a Schedule III drug. You can buy codeine, I should say you can be prescribed codeine solely, codeine tablets, not utilized much by many physicians, but the codeine product by itself, without the acetaminophen, is scheduled as a C2, lending to higher abuse, higher risk. Diacetylmorphine, which is our first semi-synthetic opioid. It was the first semi-synthetic opioid produced in the early 20th century, the late 19th century, but really made popular around 1902, 03, the early 20th century. Diacetylmorphine or heroin was originally developed as a cure for morphine addiction. Historically, in our country and around the world, morphine was being utilized to a great extent through the latter part of the 19th century. And the whole idea of dependence and addiction came about then. So some drug companies got busy and tried to figure out something that could be used to treat opiate addiction. And they came up with another opiate, which is still the medication preferred to this day in treating opiate addiction, other opiates. Some countries in this world, European countries, will use heroin to treat opiate addiction. Here in the United States, we're using currently methadone and buprenorphine, other opiates. So this strategy has been employed for quite a while. With diacetylmorphine, I should add that it didn't take authorities long to realize that this was not the best idea, that this particular chemical was actually more dangerous and causing more addictive properties than the original morphine. So by the mid-19-teens or 1914 or so, it was off the market completely. It exhibits low oral bioavailability, so nobody takes heroin by mouth. It can be snorted, or insufflation is called, which gives some absorption, but it is best absorbed through the IV route. There are a lot of novice users who will be introduced to heroin, diacetylmorphine, through the insufflation or snorting route, which has become more and more popular over the years as this chemical has gotten higher and higher potencies where they can still get a good amount of the drug into the central nervous system by simply snorting it. Once it enters the central nervous system, it metabolizes instantly to morphine. Those diacetyl groups are cleaved off by our brains, processes involved, and we've got morphine in our system. So I always like to liken heroin to morphine with a couple of diacetyl turbochargers on it that get it right into through the blood-brain barrier into our central nervous system much more efficiently. And there is the, in quotes there, the rush that is sought after by folks that use this chemical. Large amount of histamine release with IV use. That large amount of histamine release adds to the rush feeling that people experience when the stuff is injected. As you can see there, this is a C1 drug. There is no law that provides this to be possessed by anybody except maybe an experimental lab that may possess a research license for it. Hydrocodone, the next semi-synthetic opiate to talk about, again, indicated for mild to moderate pain relief. It is active only orally. It is only available now in an IR form. No long-acting product, but as I mentioned earlier, there is a long-acting hydrocodone product, a brand name Zohydro, that we probably will be seeing before the end of the year. And it is being touted as 4 to 5 times the active ingredient in a long-acting form. So we may see 40, 50 milligrams of hydrocodone in a time-release formula. And that particular product will be a Schedule II drug under the DEA Controlled Substance Act. Hydrocodone offers good bioavailability. So as we're looking at these products, some are only absorbed 30, 40% through our guts. Now we're getting to drugs that are absorbed 70%. So these kinds of parameters are certainly in mind when these drugs are being chemically devised and manipulated in the laboratory to give us the product that we're looking for. As to this point where these drugs are only manufactured in combination with acetaminophen. Oxycodone, here we have the brand name OxyContin displayed there in the picture. The older OCs on the right and the newer OPs on the left. The drug manufacturer, Purdue, changed the formulation of this drug after years of being the notorious OxyContin out there, and kind of the gateway drug to perhaps everything we're talking about here and where these prescription drugs gain their notoriety and their abuse potentials. The OPs on the left have been reformulated so they are unable to be crushed and utilized via snorting or getting the drug out into a hypodermic syringe and injecting them IV. Apparently it works very well, as the OCs did not have any type of deterrent added to it. Again, moderate to severe pain relief. This drug is active only orally, but now it's getting 80+% bioavailability. So oxycodone, as an orally taken drug, we get more of it into our system as it's taken. So these chemicals are becoming more efficient at entering our bloodstream through our GI tract. There's an immediate release form, generics, as well as Roxanne drug company makes their roxicodone. I've seen a lot of people confuse roxicodone with a particular brand or type of oxycodone, and really all they did was start making generic oxycodone in an immediate release formula and applying their Roxanne name to the product and calling it roxicodone. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It's simply their product of generic oxycodone. The extended release has always been OxyContin. These drugs are manufactured alone or in combination with acetaminophen. The long-standing drug Percocet, it's been around for quite some time, is oxycodone and acetaminophen in an immediate release formulation. I'm sorry I didn't note that there. The Percocets contained 5, 7.5, or 10 milligrams of oxycodone in a immediate release formula. Roxycodones can give you 15 or 30 milligrams immediate release, which is a good amount, and the time-release OxyContins were formulated all the way up to 80 milligrams in a time-release formula, which were diverted or crushed up in tamper-proof mechanisms were gotten around at that time. There was a 160 milligram product made that was deemed not necessary to be used in this country, and they weren't allowed to distribute in the United States. Oxycodone has multiple receptor site activity, which gives it a larger duration of action and efficiency rating as far as these products go. And we'll look a little bit more at that when we talk about receptor sites. And oxycodone in any of its formulations is a C2 product. Hydromorphone, indicated for severe pain relief, the old Dilaudid of old time, active orally and IV. IM, it's considered a highly water-soluble drug, so it can be used as an injectable, which is where it sees most of its use in hospital pharmacy. Highly reactive, what we call the mu receptor, so it has high activity, high potency at that receptor site. All in immediate release products, but there are some extended release products being developed and starting to leak out into the prescribing world now. You don't see too many, and I'm not sure if it's really caught on yet in this country. That's something to be on the lookout for and see if anybody has to come up with or be prescribed an extended release hydromorphone, which would be interesting to see if they are protected by any deterrent within the product. A good bioavailability, I don't have a percentage for you, but it provides excellent penetration in the blood-brain barrier. So it acts very quickly, and it's good for acute pain relief. The emergency rooms will use that quite a bit. And again, it is a C2 product. This drug has gotten a lot of attention as of late. It's been on the news quite often. I've seen articles printed about it as well. Oxymorphone, or Opanas, kind of has taken the place in the prescribing world that OxyContin used to fill as a potent, extended relief opioid medication that was available for crushing and diverting out of the formulation for use in snorting or injecting. Orally active products only. There's a lot of generic companies making immediate release. The Opanas are the extended release, and Endo Pharmaceuticals that makes Opana has recently begun marketing a tamper-proof Opana ER, just as OxyContin and Purdue Pharmaceuticals did a few years ago. So look for the new formulation of Opana extended release, not the immediate release, obviously, to be out there instead of what we've been seeing, and hopefully that product will lend to much less diversion in use in IV route. Highly reactive with the mu receptor, again giving it its potency. It is resistant to what we call metabolic processes, and I will show you some slides that will illustrate that a little better, which if something is resistant to a metabolic process, that means that our liver, which has the enzymes that does that, is not capable or doesn't have the material to break this chemical down as efficiently as with others. So it resists those products, sticks around a lot longer in our bloodstream, and it's available for more pain relief and reaction with the receptor sites. Again, it is a C2 drug. Buprenorphine, another semi-synthetic opioid, traditionally used for moderate to severe pain relief, as it was around in the 80s as something called Buprenex for injectable use. It has now become much more commonplace in the formulation of Suboxone and Subutex for opiate dependence treatment. And let this serve as an introduction to buprenorphine, which we'll revisit towards the end of this presentation, and a lot more information on buprenorphine and its role in opiate dependence treatment. It has high lipid solubility, meaning it will penetrate the blood-brain barrier and offer a lot of chemical to the central nervous system and the receptor sites. It has what is called partial agonist and antagonist activity, and it's unique in that respect. And when we talk about agonists and antagonists, we'll explain that a little bit more, but just keep in mind that buprenorphine offers that type of activity that none of the other chemicals we've been talking about will do. And it is a long-acting drug due to what's called affinity at the receptor site. And affinity is a chemical's ability to bind and connect with receptor sites. And we'll look at that a little more in detail as well. Buprenorphine is a C3 drug, and the fact that it is a C3 drug has allowed it to be used for outpatient opiate dependence treatment. And again, when we talk a little bit more about buprenorphine, we will see why that is. Synthetic opiates, we have three of them we want to look at, fentanyl being the first. Fentanyl is indicated for severe pain relief, chronic pain, cancer therapy, long-acting pain. It is fully synthetic, and it is the most potent opioid available, exhibiting, like we showed earlier, up to 100 times the potency at the receptor sites as morphine does. Highly lipophilic, which lends to that. When I keep saying highly lipophilic, that means that lipids, fats, which make up our blood-brain barrier, which make up a lot of our cell membranes, if drugs, chemicals can penetrate those barriers, then they are going to be more active. The more lipophilic a drug is, the more it can absorb, dissolve through a lot of our systems and get to where they need to get. This drug is highly lipophilic, designed and developed that way. The picture there shows it in the transdermal system. That is its most common method of use now. There's other there's other products of fentanyl related, Sufenta, alfentanil drugs that anesthesiologists would be familiar with in their injectable form that are used for quick sedation in the operating room. As I note there, it's fast-acting, short-duration chemistry lends to that. You want something that's going to put somebody out, sedate them quickly, but then leave the system quickly as well, so there's not this huge hangover or somebody does eventually wake up after surgery. But it has certainly found its most common use in the transdermal patch. You can see the dosage there, 75, and we're talking micrograms. That is 1,000 of a milligram. All the other drugs we were talking about were in milligrams, 10, 20, 7.5, or so forth. Milligrams. This is 75 micrograms, so 0.075 milligrams. So a very small amount of this drug. These are rated, or these are, sorry, I should say, designated as a rate per hour. So this patch for 72 hours will release 75 micrograms, give or take a few, I'm sure, through the patch into the skin of a person. How these transdermal systems work is that the drug is released slowly through a membrane on the patch against the skin of a person. The heat of our skin will draw the drug out of the patch. It will absorb through our skin, and it will settle into fat deposits under the skin layer, in our subdermal layer. And then these fat deposits, again, because this is highly lipophilic, they will absorb this drug and eventually release it into the bloodstream. So it's a slower process. It takes a little bit of time for this drug in this formulation applied to the skin to reach what they call steady state, or levels in our bloodstream that allow this drug to do what it's supposed to do. If you've ever seen one of these patches, they're not very big. They might fit into the palm of your hand. People who divert them and abuse them will either take the patch and cut it into small little pieces, put it down between their cheek and gum, and kind of suck on it, get that drug out of there, and it can be absorbed through the buccal route or between the cheek and gum where there's a lot of blood flow, and that drug then will enter the bloodstream much more quickly than it would through fat deposits under your skin. It can also be, the old gel formulations of this can also be diverted, and the drug can be gotten out and drawn up through a syringe for IV use. The drug can also be, through chemical operations, turned into a powder and mixed with heroin and sold on the street to make a more perceived potent heroin, where it's truly fentanyl in there, which has caused some epidemics in certain cities over the years, where fentanyl has been too powerful for some people and caused toxic overdoses. Methadone usually doesn't require a whole lot of introduction when I give this talk. Originally synthesized as a pain reliever for moderate to severe pain, but really found its true use during the 60s in the United States in opiate dependence treatment. Due to its high but variable bioavailability, it can be used orally. Its long and variable metabolism, high tissue binding, it kind of goes into all different types of tissues through our system, allowed this drug to be given just once a day. It has a long, what's called T1 half there, which I don't know if we've introduced yet, long half-life compared to some other drugs. Also, and compared to its own activity, where it can be in the bloodstream for quite a while but not be active for that long. So it can minimize withdrawal symptoms without really giving the opiate effect, which the whole profile of this drug made it extremely valuable in treating heroin addicts at the time in the 60s. And of course, throughout the 70s, it gained a foothold in the treatment and still used to treat those with opiate dependence. And again, it is a C2 drug. And briefly, meperidine or Demerol, moderate to severe pain relief. The first fully synthetic opiate in the 20th century, kind of looked at, tried to develop it. Originally, it started giving the chemical started working as an antispasmodic for GI issues, irritable bowel syndrome, weak mu receptor activity, some neurotoxicity where it would cause a lot of issues in some of the neuron systems. So it hasn't found a whole lot of favor. It has a very rapid onset of action, especially when used IM or IV, so it can be used to treat some acute pain. And that's where we see most of it. And again, it is a C2 drug. I mentioned tramadol because working in the field and giving this presentation quite a bit, I've had a lot of questions about tramadol, or Ultram, the brand name, and what is it, and where's it coming from, and what should we look out for. Like I said earlier, it is what's called an atypical opioid. It's a synthetic chemical analog of codeine. tablet form, oral only, available as an immediate release and extended release formulation. Its metabolite, as it breaks down, has a greater affinity and a selective nature for the mu receptor. So it's going to hit the mu receptor, and I apologize for jumping ahead, but we're going to look at how this is specific and only work on analgesia and not be quite as effective in producing some of the side effects that some of the other opioid receptors will offer. It has a high oral bioavailability, and importantly, it is a non-controlled substance. So it has been perceived as being less abusable, not even on the radar for the DEA as far as they schedule it, and seen by doctors as being a good alternative to people who may have issues with opioid dependence. There are some withdrawal symptoms for people who take it, trouble sleeping, some irritability. So it does hit the opioid receptors, and it does cause some issues. And at higher doses, it can be abused as well. So something to be on the lookout for. It is a good alternative for folks who have had issues with stronger, long-acting opioids. My personal experience, I've known some people who have been opiate dependent and have gone to this drug and have confided in me that if they take 4 or 5 instead of their usual 1 or 2, they will feel it. So there's still, their opiate receptors are still being responded, and they're still getting some of that cross-dependence with the opioids. So something to be on the lookout for if anybody is taking Ultram or Tramadol and they've had opiate issues. At this time, I put in here where we can answer our poll questions 1 and 2, just to give you all a jolt, see if everybody's awake, and see where we're going from there. I'll turn that over to whoever needs to do that and wait for my cue to continue. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, this is Chris. And then once we get done with these 2 poll questions, I've got a ton of typed-in questions for you, too. Okay, so I'm going to launch the first poll, and it is, which of the following opiates is a fully synthetic drug? Hydromorphone, oxycodone, methadone, buprenorphine, or codeine? So if you will just click on your answer, we'll give it a minute or so to get in as many participants as we can. And then I will review these and read the results off to you. Hey, Mike, while we're doing this, maybe I'll just ask you 1 or 2 questions that came up while people are voting. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. First, what is Percocet considered? I think that was back when you were talking about the different classifications.
What is it considered?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do you have an answer?
Percocet is oxycodone
Okay.
and acetaminophen, so it is considered a combination semi-synthetic opioid.
Okay. Is thebaine a completely separate substance from the opium plant, or is it a product of morphine and codeine?
It is a separate chemical that the opium plant produces.
Okay. Let's see. The next is, if analgesic property is so high for Suboxone, why isn't it utilized for pain management?
That is a good question. It is utilized for pain management in a transdermal patch form called Butrans. But the dosage that it has been accepted to be used for opiate dependence treatment is a lower dosage. But buprenorphine is considered a good drug for pain because of that. But just to paraphrase, it has been accepted to use it at a lower dosage, and distributed and manufactured as a drug for opiate dependence instead because of the dose.
Okay. Isn't heroin the only one that can cross the blood-brain barrier? They say Europe using it medically, and therefore superior in its effects, but the U.S. does not use it like they do in Europe.
They all cross the blood-brain barrier, but heroin does so extremely effectively.
Okay.
As far as policy goes, this country just hasn't gotten to the point where they want to accept that that can be a useful chemical. We outlawed it so long ago, and we haven't gotten back to even considering it as being of any medical use.
Is the absorption rate the same if swallowed or through an IV?
Certainly not. IV would be much higher. Okay. I'll address that when I get back on.
Okay. And this might be something to address later, too. We are confused about the potency list of opiates. Could you go over them again and clarify which is the strongest and which is the weakest? So that's something that...
Yeah, and you know what? I think question number 2, that's what question number 2 is.
Okay, good. Is the fentanyl drug that was shown a patch that is placed on the skin?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Transdermal means on the skin.
Yeah. If analgesic property is so high for Suboxone, why isn't it utilized for pain management? Is heroin the only one? I think some of these are like duplicates.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Okay. Well, you know what? I'll ask you a couple more while we're doing the second poll. I'm going to close the first one now, and we will look at the results. Okay. Which of the following opiates is a fully synthetic drug? 9% said hydromorphone. 7% said oxycodone. 58% answered methadone. 24% answered buprenorphine, and 3% codeine. Did you get all that?
Me? Yeah, I got it.
Okay. Okay. So everybody could see the results there. And
you can tell them the correct answer?
You tell them the correct answer.
Oh, right now?
Yeah. For this one, since it's done.
Well, I didn't know how I was heard or what was going on.
Oh, yeah.
I can do that one.
Yeah, just tell them the correct answer, and then we'll go to the second poll.
Right now?
Yeah.
We got the results from the first poll, and most people said 58% of you said methadone was the fully synthetic drug, which is true. Hydromorphone, oxycodone, buprenorphine are semi-synthetic drugs, and codeine is the natural source drug. So methadone is the correct answer.
Okay, so I will go to the second one now. Okay, which of the following opiates has the most analgesic potency? Morphine, fentanyl, methadone, hydrocodone, or oxycodone? And please answer that. Click in your answers there, and I will give Mike a couple more questions here. Why do opioids make one itch?
Okay, that's because of the histamine. It activates areas in the brain that are responsible for releasing histamine, which causes itchiness on the skin.
Okay. If, let's say, 80% of a drug enters through the GI tract, what happens to the other 20%? Does it enter through the bloodstream, or does this affect the potency of the drug?
Yes. If the 80% enters, the other 20% just kind of stays in the GI tract and gets wasted.
Okay. Okay. Is bioavailability important?
Yes. And I'm going to talk about bioavailability quickly when we get back on.
Okay. Let's see here. What can we do with patients who are in methadone and taking narcotic painkillers constantly?
That's something that's really up to the treatment program to address and see if it's a function of their dose. Perhaps they're taking something else that's interfering with the methadone, or they are just not engaged in treatment. There's other issues besides the medication portion of it that's continuing to make them use illicit substances.
Okay. If someone exercises, increasing body heat, will that increase the ability to absorb more of the transdermal patches?
Yes, to a small extent. I don't know if it would be significant, but yeah, it is related to body heat, which is important to some folks who older people who use them who aren't mobile or ambulatory, and that their skin is not at a temperature that's necessary. So yeah, that could affect it to a mild degree, but yeah, it's certainly something to be considered.
Mm-hmm. Is Ultram a controlled substance?
No.
Okay. Okay, let's see. I've got some more, but we'll save those because it looks like everybody has entered their choices for this poll number 2. Okay, so I'm going to the poll and then share the results with everybody. Okay, so the question is, which of the following opiates has the most analgesic property? 13% said morphine, 78% said fentanyl, 1% methadone, 4% hydrocodone, and 4% oxycodone. And you can tell them the correct answer, and then you can go back to your PowerPoint, and we will get some more of these questions at your next time.
All right, thank you all. The correct answer for that second question is fentanyl, by far the most potent opiate. The synthetic opioids, methadone, fentanyl, are very powerful in their analgesic possibility. And fentanyl here by far 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, being a 1 in our scale. So if you're ever going to look at that, always consider morphine a 1. Hydrocodone and codeine fall below it as being milder, but then every other drug that we're looking at is going to be more powerful than morphine as far as analgesic potency goes, by a little bit or by quite a bit, as the case is. And I got some other questions while we were doing that. Mainly, I want to address, before we move on, the concept of bioavailability and absorption. What we talk about when we mention bioavailability is that is just a term that says how much of this drug is available for the body. So what happens is, if you just picture the inside of your stomach and your small intestine, you got chemical in there that's rolling through with everything else. How much of it is going to cross over from the lining of the small intestine into a bloodstream? And there's blood vessels interwoven all through this, so it just goes all through one lining and into the next, and they're in the bloodstream. So bioavailability means how much of the drug is absorbed as a percentage to be used by our system. It's got to get in the bloodstream to get to our site of action, important to us, which is the brain. If a drug is 80% bioavailable, that means the other 20% just never kind of makes it through the wall of the intestine and ends up, with your lunch at the end of the road. It doesn't get absorbed through our body by several chemical forces that prevent it from absorbing. And when drug manufacturers put these products together and they make pills, or tablets, capsules, or liquids, or patches, or injectables, they need to know all of that. And a good rule of thumb to remember is that IV injection equals 100% bioavailability, because you are putting it right into the bloodstream. It doesn't need to cross through anything to get there. You want something, you want to get all of the drug into the bloodstream, that's the way to do it. You don't have to rely on your GI tract interfering in various ways to get something. And I hope that answers the question you have. We need to get this going again. So we're going to touch on some pharmacology, which is what I just kind of introduced there through the absorption. If we talk about pharmacology, which is, it explains how drugs produce what symptoms, what they do in the body. We can take it for granted that if we take a morphine pill, it's going to relieve our pain. Well, pharmacology is going to look at, well, why does it do that? What else could happen as far as side effects? The idea of tolerance. How does tolerance develop in our brain and our neurons in our body? Why is withdrawal present? What's going on there? What are all these processes? And what we're just talking about, bioavailability or absorption, on our second bullet point there with pharmacokinetics. Absorption, distribution, where does it go in our bodies? Metabolism, how is it broken down? And elimination, how do we get it out? All of these parameters, all these kinetic forces have to be understood and measured fairly specifically before these drugs can be utilized by individuals for their specific indications. Absorption is a big area because we need to get the drug into the bloodstream and make it work. I don't have this part of this presentation, but as far as looking at pharmacology, there's different modes of absorption. You can take a tablet orally. You can put something under your tongue sublingually. You can insufflate it through your nose. You can inhale it into your lungs. You can inject it into your muscle. You can put a patch on the skin transdermally. You can inject something IV. You can put a suppository rectally. All these routes of administration are going to give you different rates and different modes of absorption, or how's this stuff going to get into your body. Some drugs don't work well in the GI tract. They get broken down. They're not able to be absorbed properly, so they need to be either inhaled into the lungs, injected into a muscle or a vein, placed on the skin, and so forth. Metabolism is very important to how these drugs act in our bodies, how they stick around, how they're eventually gotten rid of. Every chemical that enters our bloodstream, our liver views as a toxin. Even if it's meant to help us feel better overall, when it reaches the liver, it is something viewed as a foreign substance, and our liver has methods to get rid of this stuff, break it down and get it rid of our body. And our main mode of elimination that we care about is through the urine, and that's why we use urine drug screens to see what's in there. Terms such as half-life, onset of action, duration of action, route of administration are all part of pharmacology, and I just mentioned all the different routes of administration. Onset of action, how long does this thing take to become useful? If someone is in acute pain in the emergency room, they're going to want a drug with a fast onset of action, and that usually has an IV or IM route of administration. You don't want to wait for it to dissolve in the stomach, break down, pass into the small intestine, be absorbed, go through the liver, get up into the brain. That takes, like we saw earlier, 30 to 60 minutes. IV route of administration can happen within a minute, as is inhaling something. If anybody in this audience is asthmatic or knows of anybody that's asthmatic, when they have their rescue inhaler, they need something that's going to work extremely quickly, so they shoot it into their lungs. The lungs have a huge area to absorb stuff into the bloodstream and shoot it up to the brain very quickly, or to what other sites into the bloodstream, wherever else it needs to go. Duration of action, how long does something work? How long is it good for? We know some drugs are long-acting. We talk about methadone being long-acting, extended release drugs being long-acting, immediate release being short-acting. Why is that? Why do some act longer than others? And we'll look at why that happens. Just briefly with half-life, half-life is a term that states how long does it take for a drug to become at half the amount in our plasma or in our bloodstream. So it goes from 100% to 50%, from 50% to 25%. How long does that take? And every drug is going to have its specific half-life listed with it. And again, that might be a function of absorption or distribution throughout the body, or how long it takes to break it down in the liver. All of these types of factors have to come into play to see the mechanics or the kinetics of how these drugs are going to work in our bodies. As far as opioids go, onset of action is immediate or within a minute, 30 seconds or so with the IV route. And that is the preferred route by most people who use these substances. They want a rush that's provided by getting as much drug to impact our nervous system as much and as quickly as possible. It's rapid by the IM and PO route as well. I don't like that term there, rapid. The PO route may take anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes. More rapidly by IM. I apologize, that should be in all sense. Peak action. When's this drug doing the most that it does from one dose? Anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours when we're talking about opiates, depending on the drug and its route. Obviously, if we're injecting something, it's going to have action happen much more quickly and peak much more quickly than a orally taken drug. So an IV heroin user, they'll get that immediate rush from the drug, but it's going to peak and continue to use for about 15 minutes, and then they're going to start to come down. Duration of action of these drugs, anywhere from 2 to 8 hours. So the effects can linger up to 8 hours, anywhere from 2 to 8. And here's a chart just to give you an idea of how this stuff is, this data is put together and looked at for you. There's your bioavailability on average, onset of effect, average half-life, something called plasma protein binding, which is a complex interaction where these drugs will bind with proteins in our bloodstream and render them unavailable for use. And you can look at all this and say, wow, that's quite a bit of information, but just to look at a practical purpose, if we look at methadone, it has a high 80% oral bioavailability, meaning, hey, if most people can take this drug, they're going to get a lot of it in their system by just taking their drink every day, which is perfect for the type of setting that we use it in. It's going to have its effect in an hour to hour and a half, and half-life of 22 hours means that that drug is going to stick around in their system a long time, much longer than most of the other drugs, except for buprenorphine, which has a long half-life. Plasma protein binding of methadone is high, 80 to 90%, meaning that a lot of the drug is going to be bound up to proteins in our plasma and not be available for use. This plasma protein binding number is taken into account with manufacturing and dosages. So the 20 milligram dose that someone takes is designed to deliver just enough drug based on that plasma protein binding number. So it's known that we're only going to get 10 to 20% of it, so that dose is appropriate. And then there's the duration of the effects, typically 6 to 12 hours. So again, this is all in general. There's buprenorphine, oral bioavailability. Sorry, I apologize. 10 to 15%, just like fentanyl. Not a good drug to take by mouth. It gets destroyed in the pH environment of our stomach and is rendered practically useless by the time it gets into our GI tract. Therefore, we use it by other routes. Fentanyl by the transdermal or IV route, buprenorphine by the sublingual under the tongue route for the most part, and it has also been utilized as a IV IM drug in the past as well. Just a quick look at, you'll see drugs that are noted as ER, XR, SR, TR, standing for extended release with the E and the X, sustained release, time release, and so forth. And I put this slide up here of what's called sawdust technology, which is what a lot of the drug manufacturers will use. And they have this core of, very sensitive, sorry, they have this core of a tablet that is surrounded by active drug. In this case, it's dexmethylphenidate, which is for Ritalin. And then a coating, and these are all little beads packed into a capsule that as this thing rolls down our GI tract and is exposed to various levels of higher and lower pH, it opens up and allows some of these beads to come out, and the beads will then allow water to come through and push the drug out over a time period. So it's biotechnology being employed to release drug at a slower rate using diffusion and osmotic pressure within our GI tract based on the different pH levels throughout our small intestine. So that's basically what those things mean. The newer drugs like the new OxyContin uses a different type of advanced formulation, which is more expensive, and you're not going to see in a lot of the other drugs that are available. When we look at opioids, we're kind of going to jump into the neurochemistry of these guys now, and we'll move through this rather quickly. I don't know how people's level with understanding or even caring about this goes, but in my point of view, this is where the action is, and I've been studying a bit more about this as of late to try to get a better handle on where in our brains, where in our neurochemistry systems, our neuron systems in our brains is all of this action happening, which can throw us all the way back to when we started taking these drugs 5,000 years ago. They are acting on older parts of our brain that are responsible for utilizing the neurochemicals in our brain that make our brain work, that makes it communicate with different areas of the brain. As far as brain structure goes, our brain is extremely complex. There are between 100 and 200 billion neurons in our human brain, and some of these neurons can have over 150,000 connections each as they spread out in that little kind of spider dendritic form we kind of look at here. So there are essentially trillions of connections in our brain that strengthen, that form as we develop. Obviously in utero as the brain forms roughly, as we're young children, as we're adolescents, and even into young adulthood. And now they're looking at ways that to continue to make the brain develop properly to prevent Alzheimer's disease. So it's a dynamic process that is going on all the time. And I mentioned earlier about opioid use by 12, 13, 14-year-olds who are placing these powerful chemicals in their brains and upsetting the balance of their neurochemicals that are responsible for pleasure and reward systems and building memory circuits based on these experiences before their cortex or their brain that's responsible for reasoning and judgment and higher decision making are really fully developed. So they are lending to the development of these higher functions through these altered pathways that are highly sensitized to opioid structure. So if people, any of you out there listening, work with adolescents or work with young adults who have been using opiates from a young age, and now you're sitting there trying to reason with them, you're going to have a large wall to scale there to truly make them start to see the reasoning behind it, because they haven't used that function to a very large extent. So the reason and the judgment that you're trying to impart on them is really a foreign concept. So you need to step back and use as much professional judgment as possible. I don't work in that area, and I commend people who do, as I realize that that is a difficult task. I've worked with some young adults who have early 20s who have been using substances for a good 10 years, and we're basically looking at the same situation, but hopefully they've had some other developmental issues that allow higher brain functions to come in play. And I get into all that because we're looking at structure and see that there is a direct connection to the primal release of neurotransmitters that give us the pleasure and the reward and these higher functions in the brain. The neuron structure is unique to any other part of the brain, any other cells in our body where they branch out and utilize synapses in their function and have these tremendous amount of connections likened to what we call social networking now, where you talk to one person who can talk to 500, and those 500 can talk to another 500 and so forth. That's what our neurons in our brain do. One can link to hundreds, thousands. One particular cell, as I said, could have 100,000 links, which can talk to another 1,000. Hopefully you get the picture that once you start working down these pathways, it becomes extremely complex. It's a complex interplay of electrical transmission and chemical signaling. And the chemical signaling is what the neurotransmitters modulate and why they are so important. We're not going to get into a huge discussion here. We don't have the time on electrical transmission and chemical signaling per se, but keep in mind that neuron function and what makes our brains tick is a combination of both electrical and chemical signaling. Finally, opioids. What do? Why do we take them? Why are they prescribed? Why has the opium plant been around for so long? What do these chemicals do for us? We mainly think of them, and for the most part, painkillers. That's what we look at them as, and that's why people take them in this country, and that's why they're utilized. We've got a lot of chronic pain cases, a lot of workers' compensation cases. Analgesia, the main effect sought after by opiate users. The way our third-party medical system propagates care now, there's not as much time for a doctor to see a patient, and not a lot of interaction there for the most part. So medication has become our mode of treatment, and for pain, it's simply put the one area where you get results and it keeps a client happy. Doctors want to see their patients feel better. They want to see them happy. And I read where, most doctors will say when people ask for pain medication, it takes 5 seconds to say yes, and it takes 45 minutes to say no. That being said, you get the point. These doctors don't have time or the desire to go through that whole conversation. So prescribing. And then down the list with all the other effects: euphoria, sedation, nausea, vomiting, constipation, depresses the cough reflex, has effects on mood, depression, the reward system, endocrine, cortisol levels, stress reactions, respiratory depression, the signals in the brain to keep our lungs going, get depressed to the point where our brain really doesn't send the signal to tell our lungs to keep going. So you get to this point where the brain just doesn't send that signal and we stop breathing. Pruritus or itchy skin. There was a question earlier about why that happens, and that goes back to the histamine release. Histamine being a byproduct of all this chemical reactions. We get a lot of histamine release when opiates are present, which causes itching. Amiosis, or the pinpoint eyes, that is also an effect of when someone's under the influence of opiates. The neurochemistry that we need to peek at is the chemistry of the mu and the mu receptors, the delta receptors, and the kappa receptors. Sorry, I was looking at my clock there, and I think we need to move on a little bit more quickly. I know we got a late start, but let's keep going. The mu receptor, named after the capital letter M, named after morphine by Greek discoverers. Mu receptors were discovered in the 70s, the existence of endorphins. Subsequently, they found other sites, delta and kappa receptors, which lend to other effects of the opiates. As you can see there, analgesia across the board, but some of the other receptors, the mu subtype 2 receptor causes different effects that happen. And different chemicals we looked at based on their chemistry are going to be more potent at one subtype than the other. So one may be strongly mu1 receptor. We're going to get a good bit of analgesia, but not strong on the kappa receptor, so we won't get so much respiratory depression or euphoria or that type of thing. That's the type of characteristics that we look for when we're designing these opiates. The neurotransmitters, we can talk about them for quite a bit, but these are all the neurotransmitters that come into play when we're talking about opiate neurochemistry. GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid, the inhibitory neurotransmitter. Dopamine, or pleasure, reward, memory neurotransmitter. Endorphins are natural pain relievers. Glutamate, which helps with substance P, along with NMDA, which is not mentioned here, with continuing with the pain transmission signal within our neurons. Serotonin and norepinephrine have some indirect influence into the pain pathway as well. Always consider what's called the mesolimbic pathway, or the reward pathway of the brain. Unfortunately, opiates are going to hit some opiate receptors in our brain that slow the pain perception signal down, which is great, which is what they're supposed to do. But they also go to areas of the brain that are high in dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and create a response in that area. So now in the nucleus accumbens, or the amygdala, where emotions come into play, dopamine, norepinephrine are utilized. So we get these substances coming into play as well. So not only are we relieving pain, but we're also associating a high degree of pleasure with this pain relief. And there's just so we're not talking about just simply in space, there's a diagram as to where these pathways exist. You can see the dopamine pathway starts way deep in the brain. There's a lot of norepinephrine and dopamine. And these signals transfer all the way out to the frontal cortex, which is responsible for higher functions such as decision-making, impulsivity control, judgment. What I mentioned earlier, that's why this all becomes important, because we're starting at a low level and influencing how we utilize our higher brain function. Quickly here, I want to show you how the way the receptor site diagramming and how we see it has evolved. Basically, we used to look at it as a lock and key theory. Like, there's the chemical, and it fits with a receptor site just like a lock and key does. And then we get a more expanded view of how these neurotransmitters will be released from one nerve cell to the other and occupy a site here and open a channel and allow charged particles to go through to continue with the signal. And that's a little more complex than that, but that's basically how it works. The synaptic cleft is important in where all the neurotransmitters are going to act and where these drugs are going to act as well. We've got a more expanded view of an opiate mu receptor here, where it's not being influenced by an opiate, but in that case, we've got a lot of GABA, the inhibitory receptor, being released from one cell and causing a negative feedback on the dopamine release from that cell. So they kind of work in concert to maintain our dopamine output within our cells, GABA being kind of like the monitor of how much dopamine or some of the other serotonin, norepinephrine neurotransmitters are being released in like a homeostasis site. When the mu receptor is influenced or activated, you get a negative feedback on the GABA receptor, which then doesn't supply as much GABA, and then that negative feedback's not there, so you get a flood of dopamine. This, in conjunction with the opiate receptor's influence on the substrates of glutamate and substance P within the cell, which slows the pain response down. In concert, we've got lower pain threshold acknowledgement, no feeling of pain, as well as a well-being feeling that, that feels really good. This is what I've been looking for. Unfortunately, when someone is not in pain and they take an opioid, the response is more dopamine modulated. So now we've got tons of dopamine coming out. So that's why when someone who's in true pain and they utilize these, the drug is taken up by the responses that modulate that pain and not so much of the dopamine outflow. To an extent, yes, but not as much. But if there's no pain present, all of the opiate is going to generally be utilized to allow dopamine to be put out, and therefore the higher reward system. And this might look like a mess to you, but this is the current viewpoint of an opiate receptor. And I just show you this because it's extremely complex, and it's a long string of amino acids that's outside the cell, that embeds in the cell in these 7 bundles of amino acids, and then has a portion within the cell. So if you change some amino acids in certain places, you get a different type of receptor in a certain individual that might be responsive to a different type of chemical. And the chemical has to attach to certain parts of the external portion of the receptor, which causes changes, which causes the internal portion to modulate the contents of the cell, send the signal to the next cell. So for our purposes here, just realize that this is a very complex acknowledged system where you see here for a mu, kappa, or delta, you've got different amino acids in different places, which will react differently to the different products we've been talking about and cause various effects. Terms to recognize and be aware of when we talk about opioid receptor activity: you can have an agonist, you can have an antagonist, or you can have something called a partial agonist. Agonists will cause an action at the receptor site. An antagonist will block an action, and a partial agonist will do a little of both. It will have some agonist activity, it will have some antagonist activity. And in that case, we'll be talking about buprenorphine as a partial agonist. The terms of affinity and efficacy become important when we discuss opiates and how they work at the receptor site. Affinity is the strength of the interaction between the drug and the receptor. And if we're looking at this whole protein complex again, certain chemicals are going to have a higher way to bond with these types of proteins based on their chemical composition and a higher affinity. A higher affinity can relate to higher efficacy, or the measure of the strength of the activity or the effect of that. An antagonist, on one hand, will have a high affinity for the receptor site. It will go right to it. Say we're talking about Narcan or naloxone, but it will have absolutely no efficacy. It will cause no effect within the cell itself. So it is an antagonist. Most opiates are agonists, stimulating the mu, delta, and kappa receptors. They have relative or differing affinity, genetic differences in receptor sensitivity accounting for that. So we got to look at people's different genetic makeup and how they receive these opiates on their different receptor sites. Most opioid agonists have what's called high affinity and high efficacy. Partial agonists will have high affinity and low efficacy at the mu receptor site, and they will diminish activity of other opiates. So they will occupy that mu receptor site and not allow any other opiates to get in there and attach and do what they need to do. They have high kappa receptor antagonist activity. That's why they're called partial agonists. They will block the kappa receptor for analgesia and abuse deterrence. So they may not be quite so good in the analgesic form, and they may work as far as not causing a reward system through the kappa receptor activity. High kappa receptor activity leads to ceiling effect of analgesia. Only so much of it is going to work, and certain side effects, namely respiratory depression. When we're talking about buprenorphine, you've got to recall that it has some high kappa receptor activity lending to its limited effects of analgesia and limited respiratory depression side effects. And antagonists, as I mentioned, have high affinity and no efficacy at all three receptor subtypes, mu, kappa, and delta. And they will block or diminish the activity of the other opiates. An oral drug naltrexone and the parenteral or IV IM use naloxone are used for this. And when we look at Suboxone, it is combining buprenorphine with the drug naloxone. Hopefully we can get to all this without running through this too quickly. Let me just say quickly here that opioids are broken down in the liver. There are thousands of different enzymes in our liver that have been identified. A subset of them are responsible for breaking down opioids. And there's a variation in individuals based on their genetics, their gender, their age, their diet, other drugs, a disease state, HIV or hepatitis. where they have an altered amount of utilization of these liver enzymes. So they are going to process and break these drugs down differently. When opiates make it through the liver and they are subject to the different metabolic processes, you're going to get inactive and active, what are called metabolites. In fact, some of the metabolites are more active than the parent compounds. Once the drug goes through the liver and breaks down, the liver may spew out or spin off a compound that's even more active as an opioid. And let me show you this thing here. There's morphine in the middle, which I hope I don't mess this up while we're doing it. But if you have morphine in your system, it breaks down to hydromorphone. It also breaks down to this metabolite here. It also breaks down to something called normorphine, or normorphine glucuronide. If you've got heroin, it breaks down to the 6-monoacetylmorphine. And that, before it turns into morphine and then before it goes into all the other processes. And this 6-monoacetylmorphine, or 6-NAM they call it, is the byproduct that you can look for in a urine drug screen through advanced lab process, obviously, to determine if someone is indeed using heroin and not any other opiate. It is specific, this little AAC here, it is specific to the breakdown of heroin. It's there for a short spell, so if it is present in a test, you can be assured that someone was using heroin recently. You see codeine, some of it breaks down, there's the percentages to morphine itself, as well as to some of these other byproducts, codeine to hydrocodone to hydromorphone. The hydromorphone is the chemical that is usually looked for in some of these tests to determine if someone is using opiates, because hydrocodone, codeine, morphine, heroin, all are going to end up as this in the urine as a product of the metabolic process. As you can see, codeine breaks down into hydrocodone. Codeine is a large source of developing hydrocodone in our system, as we talked about. Our bodies do it, but we can do this in a laboratory to create hydrocodone as well by employing the same process that our body. It's a little fuzzy, but here's some of the enzyme involvement, some of the different enzymes that are looked at, phase 1, phase 2, how these drugs are broken down, and what types of metabolites are created. Major opioid metabolites, again, just a table version of that thing we were looking at. Oxycodone, oxymorphone, they weren't on this initial breakdown at all, so that's why they are not seen on a regular opiate screen. You've got to look for oxycodone, breakdown to noroxycodone. It forms oxymorphone, which is our brand name Opana, in its metabolic process. So oxycodone, as it breaks down in our system, gives us some oxymorphone, which is going to lend to its long-acting nature. You're getting oxymorphone in your blood. More heroin, of course, breaking down to morphine, and then the 6-acetyl, and so forth. I'm sorry. So if we have time, we can ask some other questions. If not, we can just continue to move on. I'll leave that up to the moderator.
I do have quite a few other questions here, and I just want to say that while we might not get to all of them, after the online course, we were talking about having another webinar that's just sort of pulling everything together, and it's a review, and Mike will be available on that too. So if we don't get to your question today, you will have a chance to connect with him again. Do you want to do a couple of these? I know we're getting to the end of the session right now, so it's up to you if you want to do a couple questions now, or if you have more to go over.
I can. We can do question 4.
Oh, the poll?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just a moment. I think I have to get rid of this one first. Okay. Something's up with this poll thing. Okay. Let's see, I have the, do you want it 3 or 4? 3, the partial agonist? That
4,
one?
please.
Okay.
No, question 4, absorption, distribution.
Yes.
Pharmacokinetic processes.
Here's the poll, so please participate and answer this. Which of the pharmacokinetic processes account for the variability of response in opiates among individuals? Absorption, distribution, metabolism, or elimination? And we'll just give a short time for people to answer that, and I'll just ask you one other, a couple questions here. To Mr. Smith, you can log off now if you have a client coming in, and this part is being recorded too, and you'll be able to see it on the online portion. So there's that one. Is methadone intended to be used as a lifelong therapy?
It certainly has proven to be that. Yes, it can be.
Okay. If SI, it says if SI, is it related to GABA? I don't know if that's
I'm sorry?
correct. Yeah, I don't think that was
SI?
What are endocrine effects on opioids?
Opioids affect cortisol levels in the endocrine system, as well as testosterone levels.
Does the function return with adolescence after DC of opiates? That might be discontinuing, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think the question is, obviously, depending on how long they're using the drugs and how much, what age they started. I mean, a lot of variables in that, and how much treatment they are engaged in over time.
Okay.
But yeah, I think they might be talking physiologically where, yes, it's possible to reestablish with, with therapy the functions that I think they're referring to.
Okay. Can you explain the difference between half-life and duration?
Yeah, half-life is a number that is assigned to a drug that specifically states how long the drug stays in our system, for half of it to be eliminated. Duration is a term that describes how long the effect of the drug is going to be felt by a person.
And what is levorphanol?
Levorphanol is a semi-synthetic form of morphine that has been around for a while, but is not used all that much anymore, mainly as an injection in hospitals now for severe pain relief. And you don't see it quite that much in use anymore, so that's why I didn't refer to it.
Okay. What does PO root mean?
PO is by mouth, oral.
Okay. Are all areas of the brain affected equally with opiates, with opioids and opiates?
No, they are not. Certain areas have a higher density of opioid receptors in them, being the VTA we talked about, and other areas. But no, there are some areas that are much more sensitive and have much greater amount of opioid receptors.
Okay. I'm getting some messages now that some people's offices that open very early are now closing. So I don't want to keep anybody late. We might be going a couple more minutes, but you will be able to see this on the online course, and you will be getting email about that within 24 hours. So please feel free to leave if you have to. Okay, well, let me just go over this latest poll, and I think then we can go on to the instructions for getting to the online program, okay?
Okay.
Okay, as far as the pharmacokinetic processes account for the variability of responses in opiates among individuals. 43% said absorption, 3% said distribution, 52% said metabolism, and only 2% said elimination.
Okay, I can see where those answers would come from. The answer I was looking for was C, metabolism, because of the variability, for all the reasons we talked about, in someone's liver enzyme capacity and breaking these things down. But again, with absorption, we talk about the variety of absorption factors that are present to create differences in the way a drug will be absorbed. That would be the same across populations. I was just looking for something that says within individuals, from one individual to the next. Obviously, if someone's using something IV, they're going to get a higher absorption than someone taking it orally. And then I put that question in there to create this little discussion. The variability within populations is because of the different amount of metabolic enzymes present in their liver. Absorption factors are going to be different as well for the way a drug is used. I hope that's clear to most people here. I don't have a whole lot of time, so what I'm going to do is just talk about a couple things that need to be kept in mind when we're talking about treatment of opioids. We've looked at all the various opioids and how they've come about and how they're used and what types of effects they cause and why they might cause different effects based on subtle differences in their chemistry. In the end, someone who is abusing these drugs are going to develop tolerance and a physical dependence to these drugs based on how they affect our neurochemistry. And the case is always someone starts with mild doses of a lower potent drug, such as maybe hydrocodone or even tramadol, and end up injecting heroin. Why is that? It's because of the tendency of opiates to create physical dependence and tolerance. Nerve cells adapt, and I'm going to paraphrase all of this because we're short on time, but our nerve cells adapt to get back to the mode that they need to, and pain relief doesn't happen as it should. So more drug is needed. So the hallmark of tolerance is that there is more drug needed to create the same pain-relieving effect. Mu receptors become less responsive. Receptors become less available. We saw all that twisty kind of amino acid protein sequence. They downregulate. These things sink into the cell and don't become available so much because there's too much drug out there, and they want to be more efficient in processing it. They do their processing inward, but they don't reform on the outside of the cell. Different parts of the brain, the locus ceruleus and norepinephrine becomes apparent. Norepinephrine is adrenaline, and that's what's implied with all of these symptoms, the withdrawal symptoms that we are looking at when we are in withdrawal. I'm going to try to move ahead here. Opiate withdrawal symptoms. If you've treated anybody, you're concerned about opiate use. The withdrawal symptoms are what keeps people from seeking long-term treatment or stopping use. The withdrawal symptoms are so severe and intolerable that people cannot do it because of the tolerance that builds up, because of the physical dependence. When you take the drug away, the nervous system reacts to a point that it wants that chemical to maintain this state of neurotransmitter release that it's had. So all of a sudden, it is releasing huge amounts of this neurotransmitter, looking for the response that it has got used to having. So you just think of it as the opposite effect of the symptomology. Instead of constricted pupils, you get dilated pupils, runny nose, epicora. I'm not sure why that's in there. The eyes water. You get runny nose. You get the hairs raise up. You get nausea, vomiting, diarrhea instead of constipation, yawning, restlessness, irritability, elevated blood pressure, inability to sleep, the COWS scale, the clinical opioid withdrawal symptoms. All these have to be measured when someone seeks opiate treatment. Is where are they in this opiate withdrawal stream? And there's all the parameters or symptoms that are looked at, and we've got to measure how far along is someone with this. Skip that. And moving quickly along here, because the CE program that's going to follow this is going to look at opioid replacement therapy in the model of buprenorphine and what are the goals of that type of therapy. And just to move a little bit further into buprenorphine, it is a Schedule III drug, a partial agonist at the mu receptor and an antagonist at the other delta kappa receptors, extremely long half-life, allowing for once a day, once every other day dosing, variable within people. Again, we mentioned earlier, it is a semi-synthetic drug based on the thebaine chemical in the opium plant. It is designed for sublingual administration, meaning the tablet or the film that has been devised is used to place under the tongue because it does not absorb well orally. It has a ceiling effect because of the way it interacts with the delta receptors of only 32 milligrams or so as a dose. So you can't take more of it. You can't kick in the respiratory depression side effects of opioids and therefore have that fatal overdose symptom. There are prescriber regulations that were placed to allow physicians to prescribe this on an outpatient basis. And you'll hear obviously more and more about that. There was a question while we were at the break of why isn't it used for pain relief? And it has been in the past, but this particular formulation for sublingual administration and the dosage that was devised, the lower dosages, are not appropriate for pain relief, but only for the partial agonism of the mu receptor and allowing that lack of euphoria, lack of sedation, and inhibition of the withdrawal symptoms. Again, there's buprenorphine like we looked at earlier. There's a half-life curve. We were talking about half-life. As you can see, a 16 milligram dose initially. When it finally reaches 8 milligrams in the bloodstream, that was at 37 hours on this particular person. So you can call half-life at 37 hours, and it may not be perfect where another half-life is going to be exactly another 37 hours, but the point is that a half-life curve is always going to look like this, and it's going to take about 4 or 5 half-lives for something to be out of the bloodstream. And here's the effects on this type of a curve that show if you take a dose once a day, 16 milligrams at 24 hours, 48, 72, 96, and so forth, as that half-life accounts for the blood or the drug leaving the body, and you take another dose on top of it at 24 hours, you're building on the stuff that's already in the bloodstream with each subsequent dose to eventually reach a point where this area under the curve, they call it, stays the same, which may take 10 to 12 days to get to that point. So it builds on itself because it's not leaving the bloodstream as quickly as you're putting more into it. You're constantly building on what you've already got in the bloodstream. Buprenorphine is in Suboxone. The formulation includes naloxone in a 4-to-1 ratio, 8-to-2, 2-to-0.5. Naloxone, being an antagonist at the mu receptor site, was put in these formulations to deter diversion for IV use. And what that means is that if you put it under the tongue and take this drug, the naloxone is not going to do anything. It is not orally effective. It falls under a drug that we were talking about earlier with no bioavailability. But if you use it IV, now you're introducing it to the bloodstream. Now it's active. Now it's going to get to those receptor sites and be an antagonist and block the effects of the buprenorphine itself and any other drug that you want to take. That's the theory. the effectiveness has been questioned by many sites that I've looked at and many people I've talked to where they don't believe this ratio is sufficient and people can inject this drug IV and still get euphoric effects from the amount of buprenorphine present. That being said, nothing else has been done about that, and Subutex as a straight buprenorphine product as opposed to the Suboxone combination product is falling out of favor, and this naloxone component is still seen as a good deterrent by physicians. I've seen it being used IV and told that it still provides quite a punch. They have a definite, they're called subs out there, they have a definite street market end value simply because those people who can't get their drug of choice, don't want to go into withdrawal, will take this. For people who are novice opioid users, this combination drug will provide the rush or the euphoria that's in question, and it can be diverted for IV use by people who desire to use it that way. So there's a lot of diversion and street market use to this drug. Programs are evolving to address the psychosocial needs of patients, and that's a big point there that should be in bold print and in a slide to itself that has shown me over the past couple of years that we got the drug out there, we've had doctors prescribing it, and there's been really no true motivation to provide psychosocial counseling to patients of Suboxone and buprenorphine. That is changing. Third-party payers are now starting to require it. More doctors are starting to include counseling as part of their program and allowing those professionals to be part of the treatment team. So it's being recognized that this drug may be good in what it does in preventing withdrawal and keeping someone from seeking other opiates, but the psychosocial component to keep people in treatment and to guide someone through tapering the dose down appropriately and eventually getting off of it is definitely a product of treating them in a psychosocial manner. Buprenorphine treatment has 3 phases that has to be included in all patient care. An induction phase, which again will be looked at in subsequent trainings, a stabilization phase, and a maintenance phase, where we will look at how someone is doing on this and eventually be able to get them to leave treatment. Again, if you're interested in learning more about buprenorphine, both as a treatment and detox medication, IRETA is offering a free online learning opportunity for the next month via the online learning portal at ireta.org. And this is a good way to kind of use this information we talked about today to see why buprenorphine could be important in the coming years in treating opiate addiction, why there's some questions to it, how it compares to methadone, why it has abuse potential as well as the methadone, all based on the types of pharmacology and characteristics we talked about today. There's 2 separate courses: buprenorphine treatment, training for multidisciplinary addiction professionals, and short-term opioid withdrawal using buprenorphine. And there's a slide telling you where you can access this to the ireta.org, and again, get your free CEUs and follow up with this presentation made today. And as was mentioned earlier, I will be available at the back side of all this to answer more questions. Maybe they'll be answered for you by continuing to participate in this. If not, please, I hope I didn't rush through too much of this, but again, the purpose of the follow-up and the question and answer at the end of all this is to address these questions and build your knowledge in this area as well. So thank you very much for paying attention and listening and participating, and I'm going to turn it over now to Mark.
Okay, thanks so much. It's a lot of material, and I'm sure people would have stayed on longer if they possibly could have. We're going through a lot of different time zones here, from India to Wyoming, so I know some people did have to leave. Jess Williams is going to get on now with a brief overview of the online class and tell you how to access it. So thanks again, Mike. You can listen in to this if you want to, or you're off. So Jess, are you there?
I am, yes. Can you hear me?
Do you want me to change it over to your screen, or do you want to do that?
I think I can do that myself.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike, for your presentation on the pharmacology of opioids. It was really great, and it was also part one of a three-part course that we are offering called The Science of Opioid Dependence, Treatment, and Recovery. And I'm going to just take a minute here and give you some instructions about how to sign up for the course if you're interested in doing it. And you can also feel free to contact us via email or phone in the next couple of days if you have any more questions. So here's how you sign up. In a nutshell, to register for the rest of the course, you must register for My IRETA, an individual user account on our website at ireta.org, and join a group called The Science of Opioid Dependence, Treatment, and Recovery. And to do that, you need to go to our website, ireta.org, and at the top of the home page, you'll see a link for My IRETA, and you'll want to click on that, which will lead you to a page that looks like this. And you want to click on the link here that says register here. And that will take you to a registration form where you can input your username and email address and choose a password. And it will be a form that also allows you to choose information you are interested in receiving from IRETA. You'll always be able to unsubscribe from our mailing list, and we will also protect your personal information. Also, note that you can request a new password here if you forget yours. While you're registering, you'll want to click on the box right here under Groups that says Join the Science of Opioid Dependence, Treatment, and Recovery. And then finish filling out the form and click Join My IRETA at the bottom. And that will enroll you in the course. So that means that between now and July 31st, when you log into My IRETA, you'll find a link to the online education platform that we're holding the course on. You'll be able to choose two different places. You'll choose either this link down here in the body of the text, or you can just click on Online Education. And that will take you over to our platform, which is called Moodle. And you'll be able to navigate using a side menu here. And the course is going to be listed under the treatment category. So if you click on Opioid TX, it will lead you to all of the course materials, and you'll be able to access them at any time between now and July 31st. It's self-paced, and you can take kind of take what you want from it, which means that you can participate in all three of the topics or just one or two of them. If you want to read a little bit more about the course itself, you can read about it on our website at ireta.org/current-courses, and you'll also find a link to register from My IRETA from there.
Sorry, a little late.
And if you have questions about registration for the course or CEUs for the course, you'll contact Chris Pond, who's been hosting this webinar. She would prefer to hear from you via email, and you can see her email address right there. But you can also give her a call. And if you have questions about the course itself, you'll want to contact the instructor, whose name is Lisa Howard. And if you're enrolled in the class, you'll be able to interact with her. But her email address is also listed here. It's lisahoward@gmail.com. So we want to thank you for participating in this course, and we're really thrilled that so many people have signed up for the webinar and hope that you find the other topics to be relevant. We're going to offer up to 12 free CEUs, and they're free because this is a pilot project between IRETA and the Pennsylvania Certification Board, PCB. And since it's our first time conducting a hybrid course like this, there may be little kinks that you encounter in the process, and we encourage you to get in touch if you're having any problems, and we'll help sort things out. An example of that is that it might be slightly slow if everybody on this webinar registers for the course right now or in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So if you're having trouble registering or it's moving slowly, we ask that you wait about 15 minutes, and that should solve the problem. Again, there's Chris Pon's web's email address and contact information, and you'll also receive an email in the next 24 hours with these instructions attached to it. But please feel free to contact us if you have any questions. And we want to thank you so much again for beta testing our course. And I know that it's later in the afternoon, but Chris, if there's any questions, I can answer them.
No, we don't have any questions. I'll just reiterate what Jess said, is that I'll be sending out an email within 24 hours that will have today's session PowerPoints in it, but it will also have these PowerPoints on how to access the system, so you'll be able to review that as well. I think that's it. Jess, are you done now?
Yep.
Okay, everybody, I know it's very late. Thanks for hanging in there. And we will close this off now and look for my email tomorrow that will have a lot of the CEU information and these how to access our website. So just go to www.ireta.org and you can get started right now if you want to. Okay, thanks, Jess. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to log off now.